I can barely hear that.
It's good.
It's good.
This is the Virtual Skeptics. Hey.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah,
Blah,
blah,
blah,
blah.
blah, 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 blah,
We,
blah,
for-
blah.
Out of
we
practice.
forgot how to virtual skeptic.
It's been
Bob
so
is
long.
rigging the election. Steve should be barred, B-A-R-D, from talking about Shakespeare. Barb is speaking tongues. And Tim, not here. And wow, I just totally flubbed that one. I haven't flubbed that one as bad. Actually, I flubbed it twice as bad as that. First time we ever did a show, and like, I don't know, a couple months ago. Because apparently I can just go a couple weeks and completely forget what the heck I'm doing.
Forget how to talk? Forget how to talk?
I forget how to talk, and I start talking any silly accents.
Were you in a coma recently?
Was that?
Mm.
How would I
Nice.
know?
Is that a segue or
Somebody
not?
probably would have told
No,
you. It's
we
not a
have to-
segue because I'm
stop
up
it.
first.
Stop the segues, because
Sorry.
you fall off of them and go off cliffs like the guy who invented them, which is a myth and not true. So this is Virtual Skeptics. Hi, everybody. Thanks for turning in for the first show in a month. Oh, my God.
Has it
Been a
been that
while.
long?
It's been like
Yep.
3 weeks at least. Yeah.
It was
Wow.
late September, so.
Yeah. Yep. Late September.
And I really should be back at school.
Mm.
Let me introduce these guys, because clearly after 3 weeks, you've forgotten who they are.
Plus,
And we're in
they're so
disguise.
well disguised.
Yes.
Yes.
First up, we have Pirate Bob, CSI conspiracy guy, web columnist, blogger for Skeptic Humanities and Skepticality contributor. And next we have Princess Eve Siebert, editor and blogger at Skeptic Humanities, contributor to Skepticality
I
and
think
Insight at skeptic.com.
That's the queen's crown. If she was a
Queen.
princess, she'd be wearing a tiara.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. And this is Barbara Drescher. Watch out for her. She'll send you to hell. Former psychology instructor, blogger for ICBS Everywhere, and contributor to skeptical projects such as Insight without an S at skeptic.com and the Oz Must Be Crazy. I slip it in there every once in a while. Tim is not here. So
Yeah.
Nope.
He's moving.
he's been moved and has been moving. And
Mhm.
hope he's not moving much. Never mind. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to do some stuff, and you're going to watch. And hopefully, if you're watching now, you're going to keep watching. And if you want to get involved and say some stuff that we might think is funny and get involved in what we're trying to do here, and I'm trying to move things around my screen at the same time while I'm talking, you can tweet with hashtag Virtual Skeptics, and you can also use the little chat. There's a see, everything's been moved over to YouTube now from Google Plus. And there's like a live chat box, which I'm trying to get up here and not listen to myself talk. And if you chat on that thing, which I am now paying attention to, you're welcome. Hi, Ben, Steve, Pierre, and Ben again. We will try to work you into the show. We do or do not have a trivia question this week.
It doesn't look like we do.
I don't
Yeah.
think we do, because the brain trust is not around. But we do have a video behind me if you can figure out what that is, and tweet with the hashtag Virtual Skeptics, or do the thing on the YouTube chats and stuff. I will acknowledge your awesomeness through my big glasses. Happy Halloween, everyone. What's next? Who's first? Eve is first. Eve's going to talk about like Shakespeare and Emerson and stuff.
Emerson?
Emerson, why not?
Okay.
Not Emerson?
Not everyone knows that Ralph Waldo Emerson co-wrote some of the Shakespeare plays. But, okay. Anyway, a couple of days ago, a number of news sources had some odd headlines. The Huffington Post invited readers to meet Shakespeare's official co-author.
I saw that.
Yeah. While the Sydney Morning Herald proclaimed big data finally proves Shakespeare plays were co-written by Christopher Marlowe. I don't know, is that big data like big pharma? I don't know. Now, these two headlines were just a teensy bit misleading, suggesting that all Shakespeare's works had been co-written by Marlowe, who died in 1593 at the very beginning of Shakespeare's career, making it slightly difficult for him to have done so. Although there are people who believe he faked his death and actually wrote all the Shakespeare's plays, but no. Other sources provided a more sensible, or some more sensible headlines that correctly explained that the new Oxford Shakespeare Complete Works will attribute the 3 Henry VI plays to Shakespeare and Marlowe. And the correct response to this is, that's interesting, I guess. It is not actually the most interesting thing about the new Oxford Shakespeare, and I'm really not sure why it got so much attention. Well, honestly, I kind of suspect I do, which is that it got attention because that's how Oxford University Press decided to publicize the new edition for some reason. Possibly pandering to the Shakespeare authorship controversy thing by talking about a reasonable question of authorship. Now, we do know Shakespeare collaborated with other writers, particularly at the beginning and end of his career. The subject of collaboration has become more accepted and more intensely studied over the past few decades, particularly with advancements in computational stylistics. And this isn't even the first time that Oxford has put another author's name on the title pages of some of Shakespeare's plays. If you can bring up my first slide. This is from the 1986 Oxford Complete Works, which also credited Shakespeare collaborators, though not Marlowe. In this case, it's Pericles with Shakespeare and, what's his name, Wilkins? Something like that. George. And collaboration was actually much more controversial in 1986 than it is now. And way back before that, way back in 1634, if you can bring up the next slide, this is how Two Noble Kinsmen was first published, where it is attributed to Mr. John Fletcher and Mr. William Shakespeare, gents. It wasn't accepted for quite a while. It was, fairly recently really accepted into the canon because it's not in the first folio. But so we do have the mark of collaboration from really quite early on. Collaboration was common among Elizabethan and Jacobean playwrights. Thomas Heywood said he, quote, had an entire hand or at least a main finger in 220 plays, unquote, though most of those don't actually survive. Some plays were basically plays by committee. They could have a half a dozen authors. And in those cases, they were usually freelance authors or jobbing authors who were hired to do a job by the companies. We believe Shakespeare did this sort of thing early in his career, like around the time of the Henry VI plays. But for most of his career, he was actually in a more privileged position because he was an actor, member, shareholder, and principal playwright of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, which later became known as the King's Men. So he wasn't living that kind of hand-to-mouth existence. So really, although he definitely did collaborate, he may have collaborated less and been less prolific than some other playwrights, certainly than Heywood. So it's not odd necessarily that the Henry VI plays are collaborations. Scholars have suggested collaboration for a long time, and Marlowe had been suggested as a co-writer, as had Thomas Nash and some others. In some cases, I think it's been suggested that 1, 2, maybe not 3 of the Henry VI plays were collaborations. And it's not odd that Shakespeare was collaborating. It's not odd that he was collaborating at this point in his career, or that he was collaborating with Marlowe. Because one form of collaboration was sort of almost like an apprenticeship that, a more inexperienced author would be writing with a more experienced author. It's actually stranger for Marlowe at this point in his career to have been working with a collaborator on 3 plays. Although Marlowe was only a year older than Shakespeare, he was famous by this time. He was a golden boy after having written Tamburlaine. And Shakespeare was fairly obscure. It's also a bit odd that 2 such brilliant poets, and they really were both awesome poets, that they managed to produce 3 such plays. Plays with which absolutely no one is impressed, as far as I can tell. I should mention there were other types of collaboration. I mentioned the sort of apprenticeship thing, and Jesse's been asleep for hours, and he just woke up to contribute to the show by meowing. But sometimes companies would revive older plays and then hire playwrights to spice them up a bit. So making the plays both familiar and new. Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy was a very popular play, and it was also a very influential play. It influenced Shakespeare, for instance, because revenge tragedy, like Hamlet and Titus. But the Spanish Tragedy was revived several times. We know Ben Jonson was paid to add scenes to it, although he didn't like that practice very much at all. And Shakespeare may also have contributed to it. And indeed, the New Oxford Shakespeare is including it among Shakespeare's works for the first time. Similarly, Macbeth may have been reworked by Thomas Middleton. And the New Oxford Shakespeare also contends that Middleton reworked All's Well That Ends Well. Now, about the New Oxford Shakespeare, if you can bring up my last slide, see a lovely picture of the New Oxford Shakespeare and how big it is. According to Oxford University Press, it, quote, consists of 4 interconnected publications: the Modern Critical Edition with modern spelling, the Critical Reference Edition with original spelling, a companion volume on authorship, and an online version integrating all of this material on OUP's high-powered scholarly editions platform. Together, they provide the perfect resource for the future of Shakespeare studies, unquote. And it's a bargain at $460. $460.
So they're going to sell it basically only to libraries.
Only to academics and libraries, yeah.
The authorship companion alone costs $190.
Is this the Criterion collection?
Jesus, no, this is clearly not the Criterion collection.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's just ridiculous.
Is it on Blu-ray? Because I don't like it unless it's on Blu-ray.
Oh my god! You get a hooker.
So in other words, don't expect me to do any in-depth analysis of their arguments. Interestingly, a new copy of the 1986 Oxford Shakespeare can now be had for around $20. And honestly, I'm not even sure who they really are aiming this at as a primary audience, because it's now granted you don't have to buy the whole thing, but it's too expensive, too big,
to not buy the whole thing.
For a lot of things, and I don't think it's going to become the main scholarly edition.
It has no chance of becoming the standard reference work.
Yeah, which seems to be, I mean, there are several, but the Riverside Shakespeare kind of seems to be the main one. Anyway, the really weird thing about this story is that all the news stories on Shakespeare Marlowe, it seems to me, are burying the lead. General editor Gary Taylor told The Guardian, quote, in 1986, 8 of 39 plays were identified on their title pages as collaborative, a little more than 20%. In 2016, 17 of 44 plays are identified, a little more than 38%, close to 2/5. Now, tell me, what is actually significant about this statement?
I know.
Yeah, I know, but that's because I already explained it to you. Okay,
You
Bob.
did not explain.
Or I made you figure it out when we were talking about it. Yes, Bob?
That the number of plays has gone up rather dramatically.
Oh,
Yes.
I didn't think of that.
Over the
Paid
last...
attention to the wrong information.
Yeah.
Yep.
Over the last 30 years, Shakespeare has written 5 plays. Now, that's not a huge output, but it's pretty decent for a guy who's been dead for 400 years. So what are these extra plays that Shakespeare has written? They're including the Spanish tragedy, as I said, which has 1 scene attributed to Shakespeare. They're also including a play called Arden of Faversham, again, which has maybe a few alleged Shakespearean scenes. And I'm not sure what the other 3 are, but I imagine they're probably going to include Edward III and Sir Thomas More. And I bet they're all collaborations with minimal contributions from Shakespeare. Minimal and possibly controversial contributions from Shakespeare.
So that's going to ratchet up the percentage.
Yeah, so, well, here you go. You have the 8 plays that were originally listed as collaborations in the 1986 edition, the 3 Henry VI plays, the 5 new plays, and All's Well That Ends Well, which they're attributing to Shakespeare and Marlowe. Oh, for Christ's sake, Jesse. So that gets us up to the 17. So in a way, it's not really that many. It seems like it's many more than the last edition, but these are kind of, except for the Henry VI plays, it's sort of less substantive participation, either by Shakespeare or by a collaborator. Now, a brief word about computational stylistics, or computerized stylometrics, which was used to make the determination that Marlowe was a co-author. This involves using a computer to search for particular words, phrases, spellings, usages, grammar, poetic techniques, etc. A computer program can search a huge number of works very quickly and produce a statistical analysis to sort of look for fingerprints of various authors. And it's a very useful tool. However, some skeptics seem to think that it's basically magic because it involves science and math. So for instance, a few years ago on an episode of Skeptoid, Brian Dunning said, "Perhaps the most compelling reason to accept Shakespeare as the real author of the works attributed to him is his unique and recognizable writing style, which does not match that of the other authors to which his works have been attributed by doubters. And this is not merely an unreliable subjective opinion. It's backed by hard science." Now, the suggestion that traditional literary studies is an unreliable subjective opinion that perhaps can be fixed by hard science is a little bit galling, particularly since the hard science still builds on work done for years by literary scholars who painstakingly studied the language and usage of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. But it's also just not as simple as that. A computational stylistics analysis it doesn't end all debate. It just doesn't. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Based on computational stylistics, Arthur Kinney said a few years ago, "I have now proven that Shakespeare is part author of Arden of Faversham. They guessed that in the 19th century, but no one would believe it in the 20th century. Now we know." Now, almost immediately, another scholar, Brian Vickers, offered his own computer-aided analysis that supposedly showed that Thomas Kidd was the sole author with no contribution from Shakespeare. Now, the Oxford editors are claiming that Shakespeare wrote a few scenes, but that the rest is anonymous and not by Kidd or Marlowe as others had suggested. Another example, in 1995...
Well, this suggests to me that there perhaps might be a problem, when you pick the sample size that you're going to use. What happens if you decide to limit it to just those parts that look Shakespeare-y? You can selectively pick which texts to look at.
Well, yeah, people. It's not just which text to look at. Sometimes that is
which snippets
an issue
to look at, even. That is in fact.
I would like,
but also what criteria that you're looking for.
I would like to know if any of the Shakespearean plays are written by David Bowie.
I don't think they are.
Interesting information.
Can we do a computer analysis on it and find out? Because
that would be freaking hilarious.
Sure. Hang on just a second.
Cat or?
No, they're not. Even
that behind you.
Yeah. Even more controversially,
Thanks.
In 1995, Donald W. Foster, who also, by the way, outed Joe Klein as the author of Primary Colors, the Clinton book. Anyway.
Yep.
But Foster argued that Shakespeare wrote an uninspired poem called A Funeral Elegy for Master William Peter. And he used a database called Shexicon to help with the identification. The poem was included in the Riverside Shakespeare, which, as I said, is definitely one of the standard editions. Also the Norton Shakespeare and some other editions, scholarly editions. Later, strong evidence was produced that suggested the poem had actually been written by John Ford, and Foster ended up recanting. In addition, at least one analysis of the Hand D portion of Sir Thomas More found that Shakespeare was the author. Another said that he wasn't. So, to summarize, computational stylistics, useful tool, but it's not a magic pill that will definitively prove anything. I don't know what the full argument is for the Shakespeare-Marlowe collaboration. I don't know. I haven't seen all the evidence.
Too much to find out.
I probably am never going to find out. And really, I'm not qualified to look at it and go, oh, no, that is not good enough. But I might be qualified to look at it and go, I'm a little skeptical about that. Yeah. But I will say it's not an extraordinary claim. Again, we know Shakespeare collaborated. We know he did that particularly early in his career. It seems completely plausible. That doesn't mean it isn't reasonable to be skeptical. That really, again, all three plays, why was Marlowe collaborating with Shakespeare? And can they really tell the difference, as Taylor has
in the eye and needed help?
As Taylor,
as was I.
Yes, as Taylor said, has said in interviews that they can tell the difference not only between Marlowe and Shakespeare, but Marlowe and Shakespeare being influenced by Marlowe, because Shakespeare was influenced by Marlowe. No. And Taylor, it also seems to me, was playing the rival poet card in interviews. Yes, I was going to say Bob probably knows what I mean. He didn't use that term exactly, but he used the phrase rivals sometimes collaborate. And the thing is, I suppose, it's fair enough to say any two poets, two playwrights who are writing at the same time could be competing for work, for audiences, for attention. However, if you look up rival poet, there's a Wikipedia entry for rival poet, and it has to do with the sonnets. That some people who take the sonnets as being autobiographical see evidence that Shakespeare is referring to a rival poet in his sonnets. And that's problematic because, again, the idea
this reeks of just pandering badly is what the... Yeah.
It's a problem to really read the sonnets as an autobiography. And secondly, then interpreting the right. Well, seeing there's a rival poet there, and then saying, "Oh, and it's Marlowe," is problematic. And maybe he didn't mean to suggest that, but it just is one of those things that made me go, "Hmm." Anyway, and again, as part of my summing up,
really, still,
I really was going to sum up now. Yes.
Okay.
Not sure why this is worthy of so much attention. And finally, what we can definitely take away from this is the new Oxford Shakespeare is ridiculously overpriced.
That much is true. Although
yeah, I don't know. I like the idea that this is being sold to the Wackaloon crowd. That's who they're hoping is going to be the new market.
Wackaloon crowd.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think that they'll like it very much. It is that they have a whole volume on authorship.
So much mail from Alan Tarica.
But there are legitimate authorship questions, and I assume that's what they're dealing with it in the authorship companion. I don't know if they consider the
half of the cost is the authorship companion that you can buy separately.
When did this new set come out? Because I did get some mail from him recently, and I wonder if it wasn't prompted.
It was just announced a couple days ago. I don't know.
It's like last week, I think.
Yeah, it's a staggered release. So between now and I think the end of the year.
Because something like that can stir somebody up.
Yeah.
It's been buzzing around lately anyway.
I got a random nasty comment from a different Shakespeare denier earlier today.
Can I get an apology now?
Yeah. No. For what?
And I was still disappointed the story was not about Keith Emerson, who has a box set, which is nice and is expensive.
Oh, Keith Emerson, not Ralph Waldo. Okay.
Yes. Thank you for that entertainment and stuff. Barbara's next.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I saw
something. I think it's interesting. Your tagline was something about speaking in tongues, and yet you're wearing devil horns, which I love the juxtaposition of that. So,
I was going to talk about something really, really funny today. You bring up the slide, please.
Yay.
But there just wasn't enough to it. It would have taken about 30 seconds.
God.
This was on a site called Mystical Raven. Study finds trees have feelings, make friends, and look at each other like an old couple. Yeah, it's a study.
Feels so
nice. I invite you to go to Mystical Raven and read it because it's very entertaining. Yeah. But I won't be talking about that today. And instead,
Mystical Raven's not an X-Men site. I'm disappointed.
Pretty interesting. No, instead I ignored something that popped up in my Facebook feed, and then it showed up on my local news. So, and then it popped up in my Facebook feed again. So I thought it might be worth talking about, especially since it's it's an old, common skeptic topic that doesn't pop up that often, so people kind of forget it's there. So, a 16-year-old soccer player named Ruben, last name I will not try to pronounce, received his third concussion, and it put him in a coma for 3 days. And when he woke up, he spoke fluent Spanish, but only Spanish. He could not speak it fluently before, and everybody's going wow and ooh and ah. And they're making it sound like he suddenly learned to speak Spanish, just woke up speaking a language that he'd never heard before or didn't know.
He couldn't speak his original language?
His language was English. His first language is English. But they made it sound like it was this big deal that he is, he didn't know Spanish before, and now he's speaking Spanish and not English. And if it really happened like that, then we should all be very stunned and shocked and taking it as a sign that God does indeed exist, because it's not possible to wake up from a coma and suddenly speak a language you don't know. But nobody's actually making that claim. They're just making it out to be this big deal. They are saying that he did not speak Spanish fluently before, and so suddenly he was speaking it fluently. So you can guess what the story is going to be. I read a HuffPo piece. I read a Fox News piece. I read a CNN piece. I read a Time piece. I read several smaller outlets and watched some videos. Nobody expressed skepticism or bothered to consult an expert. No neurologists were interviewed for any of these pieces. The Time piece did say, doctors have not told the family why Ruben woke up speaking perfect Spanish, although they have sought consultation with a neurologist. But of course, it then went on to discuss foreign accent syndrome, which is a completely different issue. I'm suspicious about the claim that doctors didn't tell the family what was going on, because it's actually not a big mystery.
Well, they didn't speak it in Spanish, is what it is, and because he can't understand. They told him, but not in Spanish. So.
Yeah, so he couldn't understand it. What I am puzzled is why he wasn't already under the care of a neurologist, considering he was in a coma and he woke up not being able to speak. 3
concussions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not in the care of a neurologist.
Not already under the care. Okay.
What country?
So this is here in America. I'm not even sure what city it was. I didn't catch that, but what I did see really disturbed me. Like, I saw a Fox News anchor, after expressing amazement, "Oh my God, isn't that amazing? Blah, 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 blah." She said, they say you use what, about 1/3 of your brain?
Ugh.
Seriously,
On
maybe
Fox.
she uses only 1/3 of her brain.
That's better than
Then she
10%.
Doesn't even use that much.
Then she said, so there's a lot of other languages back there, apparently.
Oh, yeah, there's like a Rolodex file of them.
So your first problem is that you're watching Fox News. So
So apparently we have all our languages back here in our brain, and all we need is for somebody to kick us in the head with a cleat to get them to come out. That's how it works.
That should happen to all Fox News
I was gonna say,
reporters,
if
personally.
Oh
if
my
we
God!
kick Fox News reporters, so they start actually
Wow.
reporting news,
I don't know.
because the news is all bad.
That's exceedingly lame.
Exceedingly, yep.
Wow.
But you know, the anchors banter today. I mean, they have to have something else to say about the story. Some local news
You are
anchors,
a fucking idiot.
yes, said they'd heard about people speaking in languages they'd never been around before. No, that doesn't happen. It just simply doesn't happen. There's this label they put on it called foreign language syndrome that really doesn't exist. There's no such thing as foreign language syndrome. There have been some odd reports. There have been some odd reports of, like, last year there was a World News report. That's really, don't put that up yet.
Oh, sorry. It was still small. You can't see that.
Oh.
Last year, there was a World News report that a 53-year-old man with global amnesia only spoke in ancient Hebrew. 2 years ago, an Australian man woke up from a week-long coma to speak near-perfect Mandarin. There was a famous case of a Croatian girl speaking German. Here's the thing. The Croatian, we don't know about the 53-year-old man with global amnesia who only spoke ancient Hebrew. It was World News, so not exactly the most reliable source. But the Australian man who spoke near perfect Mandarin, first of all, that report that said that he was speaking perfect Spanish, that's not what they said. They said fluent Spanish. This Australian, he had taken Mandarin in school. He knew Mandarin. Who's to say he spoke near perfect Mandarin? The Croatian girl, German was her second language. She had taken German in school. This particular boy, this 16-year-old boy, he did know Spanish. He knew quite a bit of Spanish. He may not have been fluent in Spanish. His brother was fluent in Spanish, however, taught him a lot of Spanish. Maybe he spoke better Spanish after he woke up from the coma because he had to, because his English was impaired. So what seems to be going on here, and it's an interesting neurological case, of language being impaired, and perhaps the brain storing a second language in a different place, what's being damaged is maybe the association cortex, which is, connected to how we associate things. There was a piece in 2010 that Steve Novella wrote on his blog about this phenomenon.
And that's neurologist.
Yes, an actual neurologist who writes about these interesting cases and what may be going on and how it's interesting. But the idea,
miracle.
No.
Yes, it was a miracle.
Yes, that's what Steve said. Yeah, I'm surprised he hasn't, totally switched
or did
locations.
He say, wow, I'm stumped, because experts are always stumped.
Yeah.
Stumped.
Baffled.
He did say he didn't know everything about it. He was interested in getting more information about some of these cases, like the Croatian girl. But it's not a big, mystery. And it's not that this guy suddenly learned Spanish or could suddenly speak a language he didn't know. That's not what's happening here. It's not this amazing thing. Another thing that they said that I found really interesting, this was not the first case, some of the other cases said this as well, is that as his ability to speak English returned, the fluency in the other language retreated. He seems to have recovered fully now, because there are videos with him speaking. I think that's very interesting, because that's a convenient excuse for him not to be able to speak Spanish so fluently now that we'll all go, oh my God, it is fluent. So none of us can actually see it and examine just how fluent it was. So if doctors didn't seem to be making a big deal out of it at the time, why might the family be making this claim now? Why could you possibly think they'd be making this claim?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Guess there was a time where
You've seen the slide?
Yes, I've seen the slide, but that aside,
yes,
there's cultural. There's a cultural, and there's also ideological. There was a time when I was a pretty big Christian, and even then, one of the things that frustrated me was people would tell stories and they would embellish them, because they were positive stories, or they were stories that would reinforce their particular view of the world. And they would add things to them, or they would exaggerate things, and they wouldn't necessarily know they're doing it, because it's just, they're trying to get people to say, this is awesome and this happened. So this is incredible because he spoke fluent Spanish or perfect Spanish.
Yeah,
that little change
I agree.
Right there is enough just to emphasize the story. But
and then that may not even be motivated. They may just notice that he was speaking it rather well, because that was all he was speaking. And there are some explanations that Steve in his post actually posits that could, their hypotheses about how it could be improved language, in a language that they weren't speaking as well before, because it isn't as much work to turn off the first language. These are all second languages, they're not first languages. So it's we have to, there is, and there's a lot of research on bilingualism actually that I've read in years past, because I've had students doing research on it. There's a lot of interesting discussion about the process of switching from one language to another, and how there are inhibitory circuits that have to be involved with, shutting off one response in order to give the other, and so forth. And this may explain some differences in attention and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of intricate stuff to be worked on here. And there's even some hypotheses that people who are bilingual have can inhibit impulsive behavior more easily, because they're used to having to do that. But the research, the evidence is kind of thin on that. But I think even more important is this next slide, which is they have a shitload of medical bills to pay for.
There it is.
And so it's really good to, the doctors didn't think it was this big thing. It's clearly been weeks since it happened, because he's recovered now, and they have a lot of medical bills to pay for, and they have a GoFundMe for it. So I don't begrudge anybody, trying to raise money to pay for their medical bills for something like this. But
possible conflict of interest there.
Yeah, trying to draw attention to it by making it into this thing that is bullshit. And I found when I was looking at this stuff, I was looking at other cases. I found this site that just killed me. There's actually a name for this. It's called xenoglossy.
Yeah,
I think that's how it's pronounced. And there's this site called Life in Psychology that had explanations for this phenomenon. And they did have a whole blog post on how language acquisition could not explain it, which I completely agree with. However, their explanations were things like reincarnation.
Oh, sweet tap dancing Jesus.
Spirit possession, telepathy.
Fuck.
Glossolalia.
And something called cryptonesia, which is actually somewhat plausible, except that it's bullshit. Unconscious learning and or forgetting a language learned in early childhood. Forgetting a language learned in early childhood is possible. You haven't really forgotten it, but unconscious learning has been proven to be bullshit. But at least it's not a supernatural explanation. The other three, of course, are.
So not glossolalia, which is the whole spiritual speaking in tongues thing.
Yeah, that's a different issue, I think.
I guess because it's a language they already know, you can't really claim that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you do see, with the Exorcist, that was a claim. The little kid was speaking languages that he couldn't possibly know.
Right.
When possessed.
Well, a lot of that sometimes, it's nonsense, or they're claims that are the biggest explanation for things like this, usually hoax. The best explanation for a lot of them is hoax. For something like this, I think it's just more of a mild exaggeration and a lack of considering the fact that he was pretty much immersed in the language. His brother, his friends all spoke it. He was trying to learn it. He knew some. It was just difficult for him to switch gears, probably.
I think that's really interesting. The idea that maybe his English was impaired and he was just trying to.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
A lot of these claims seem to suggest that that's the case. I mean, that's what's going on. The Australian man who could speak. Here's the difference, though, is the Australian man who could speak Mandarin, he kept the skill. So even though his English came back, he could still his ability to speak the Mandarin that he knew was still enhanced later. So this kid apparently can't speak as well as he could before. So I think they were probably exaggerating how well he actually spoke it. So I don't know. It's just there are a lot of great, very interesting, fascinating neurological phenomena out there. I mean, just read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and that alone will give you a bunch of them. And there's, foreign accent syndromes that actually, I think that's actually really fascinating. There are people that sometimes wake up from comas or have brain damage and suddenly they speak in what sounds like, a British accent or something like that. It's not really an accent, though. It's simply that they have a speech impediment because some part of their brain that processes speech is impaired, and it's then their brain somehow, working around that problem, and it comes out as something that sounds very much like a familiar accent.
Yeah, we are mapping the accent on it.
It's exactly.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting.
So it's fascinating,
Like
but I read all these pieces and they were all like, he spoke Spanish fluently and he couldn't speak Spanish fluently before. It's like, so what? Good God, don't, and the commentating about it just, oh my God. The brain is an amazing thing, but this isn't that amazing. It's just not that amazing. It's not that interesting, Anyway, that's all I have for you guys. So.
Poor kid. Wakes up, speaks Spanish. Parents go crazy.
Did anyone want to suggest to him he should perhaps quit soccer?
I was thinking that myself. Third concussion, he wants to get back out there on the field. His coach now tells him he has to wear a helmet. Little late for that.
He really wants that scholarship.
Yeah, well, he's gonna be, shooting himself in a hotel room at the age of 35.
Sports is a hard career. So.
That seems to be a little extreme there.
It's happened. There's precedent.
It has happened.
Hmm.
The research on concussions these days
is growing,
it's so not pretty.
And
it's so not pretty.
It's a much more serious injury than had been considered before.
Yep.
Especially multiple injuries. Yeah.
Thanks for that. That was interesting.
Sorry, it's a downer.
Yeah, it's downer, but hey, interesting. Interesting downer. Just want to point out that Mark Price is carving a pumpkin as we speak.
Is he? And is he posting pictures?
Tweeted a picture of him carving a
tweeted a picture
while he's watching. I think it's really cool.
I think
Carve that pumpkin.
This image has to be that he's carving the face of Barbara Drescher into the pumpkin.
Really?
Oh, please don't do that.
I don't know.
Something about pork and Minecraft on his shirt. I don't want to know. I do have this. No, not that. This. Which is is it really quiet? Because it's really quiet to me. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm having. Should I start speaking Spanish now?
Yeah.
I smell bread. I got a couple of robotic things that are gonna terrify you. Well, one of them might. Hello. Let's go. This robot, which looks like a creepy guy, Kangoro. I've actually talked about it before a long time ago. He's very humanoid shaped.
Oh
God!
I know. But he uses these soft servos and tons of motors to make all these, because every action that's in every joint has to have a motor that controls the servo. And so his arms have like 20 motors in it each, and all of it's just so many
Who
motors.
designed that stupid face?
I know.
Oh.
Satan.
Yeah.
Robotics don't take time with the faces. They just want the arms to work. But they had a really innovative way of because I like this story because part of what I do in my job is I write software to control custom hardware that's supposed to go on the end of robots in space. So the hands and the wrists of robots to do space stuff. So there's a lot of motors in these things, and one of the problems you always have to deal with is motor heat. If you run the motor too strong for too long, you'll burn it up. So you have to constantly monitor the heat, and you have to constantly do feedback to limit what the force you're putting into it and the amount of time you're running it, so that you don't burn the thing up.
That looks like a human in a robot suit.
It does, doesn't it?
Oh my God.
The solution they came up with, because they have
Except for
so
the
many
face.
motors and they're running them all the time, and they want to get a lot of longevity out of this, is that they make the motors sweat, which is what they're calling it. Essentially, they have a water cool system that pumps water into the motors and slowly pumps it out onto the heat sinks on the motors, so it will boil away as the motors are running, which is essentially the same way that sweating works. The water evaporates off our skin and cools us off. I just think it's a really cool system, and they claim that they can make him do push-ups for like 11 minutes, which it doesn't sound all that impressive, but I guess for some people it does. And the fact that it's kind of a sweaty, drippy robot, I thought that was kind of scary as well.
Yeah.
So robots in the future will sweat
stinky
and stink. I'm sure it does. I'm sure that it probably doesn't smell human. But the water boiling off is going to have a smell, and you're going to smell the hot electronics, so it's going to smell kind of metallic, I guess. Yes.
Do you give your space robots terrifying faces to frighten off the aliens in case they should meet some?
I'm not allowed to talk about it.
No, all right.
No, we don't. Our robots don't have faces.
Even scarier.
The claw. I work on the robots. I don't work on have faces. I work on have faces. There are NASA robots that have faces. The Robonaut, which is
Robonaut does.
It has Robonaut 2 is actually a torso and has legs now. It has spider legs now, and it has a face. It's like a blank metal face.
It looks like
sockets.
a member of Daft Punk.
It does kind of, yes. It's not very. It's not very human face. It doesn't have any articulation. It's just kind of there so that it looks humanoid. The other one is the Valkyrie, which is the new JPL R&D platform that was supposed to compete in the Robo Challenge, but didn't make it, and is now part of the NASA's Robot Challenge, which people can sign up to write software for it and win a big prize, which I talked about previously on the show. So none of those sweat. This one sweats. This one is so gritty and awesome because it sweats and smells. Just want to say, there you go. That's why I like that one. The next one. So there's a whole bunch of research work. A lot of it coming out of Harvard because they like to do the little tiny robots. They do a lot of 3D printing and they're trying to do swarms and things like that. And this is yet another one of those projects where they're just looking at ways you could possibly produce large amounts of very simple robots very easily and cheaply. And this essentially, they don't have a name for it because it's a research project. But it's a trapezoidal shaped robot that folds up. This is an example of one of the servos folding. And they're printed in large sheets and multiple layers. And there are still some components they have to actually install manually. But the idea is that the servos are just, you apply power to them and they heat up and then they compress. So they're like little joints that squeeze. Like there's a good example of the individual joints folding up. But they would print it in this big triangular shape as a group of 4. And when they heat up, the joints would close up and they would also separate from each other. So you kind of build them all at once. There's a set of 4. And you can watch them separating from each other and actually they'll smoke quite a bit. If you look closely, you can see the smoke. Which is the one question I have about it, because they seem to use a lot of power to produce the heat required for these, which I don't know how that power could be on board. The next part of the video, they can watch them kind of moving around, and it's sped up like 64 times, so they don't. Let's see, not that part. This next one. There. And this is one of them trying to find its way toward light source, like a bug would do. So it actually can do some simple behaviors. Although, hey, that is 1x speed, so that's not bad for a little simple.
So it's folding that way?
No, I mean that's the completed robot and has little wheels on it, and the top part has a little microcontroller on it. But that's that's like assembled. So the whole thing would be essentially manufactured in layers. Okay. And then they would assemble by just curling up like that. And then they would scoot around and stuff like that. And the idea is it's a possible design that you could miniaturize and have a whole bunch of these working together or something like that. Which is the goal. The end goal is to have large groups, swarms of tiny robots that work together as a group. And everyone, all these PhD students are just trying their damnedest to do what they can do with the current technology. So cool, and never know. We're gonna have swarms of these little tiny triangular things attacking us with sweat.
Are they aware that swarm just never suggests something good?
It doesn't, does it? And most of the project ideas or the prototype ideas that get thrown around with these swarms, they just look so menacing, and that nobody seems to understand. Although they do some cool stuff. There's a TED Talk about I watched this 2 weeks ago, and I can't remember the guy's name. I'll have to link it in the show notes. It's really cool. It's worth watching. It's with quadcopters, and the kind of system they were using where you have overall cameras and then you have targets on the quadcopters so you can track them in 3D space. And I think it's called acrobatic robots, and it's worth looking up because it's a very good demonstration of what you can do with smart robots. Like this one part, which I thought was really interesting, which is why I want to talk to him. He has a quadcopter that well, he wears gloves, but you can grab it and it will resist you, right? And you can simulate different strengths of gravity. So you could grab it and throw it, and it will either fly like zero gravity and just fly off, or it will fly like it's in a viscous fluid or in some kind of moderate gravity. And he was actually trying to juggle these things, and they would behave like they were in different densities of atmosphere or strength of gravity. And I thought that was really cool because we do that kind of simulation with robots, with large simulation platforms, and any kind of simulation of less than Earth gravity. Cool to me because it's hard to do. Anyway, I will link that in the show notes as well, so people can watch it. It's a cool video to watch. And there you go. Should be afraid.
Oh, also, ISIS is using drones as weapons.
Yeah, I saw that. It's not really that big.
Isn't that perverse? They're just
No, it's not perverse. The drones they're talking about are the kind of stuff you can buy off the shelf.
right.
So a quadcopter, you can go down to your hobby store, or you can order on Amazon.
Be careful what you say next because we've already been visited by the FBI.
Really?
Huh? I got a call from the FBI from this show.
Really?
You want to talk about that on the show?
About what?
No, we really
No,
don't.
I can do that now.
Okay.
But yeah.
It's not.
Surprise, everybody!
Yeah, but the terrorists using drones is just a matter of time. They're easy to get, and they're inexpensive now. So, I mean, it's just like them buying an RC helicopter or an RC plane, which have been around forever, and using that. Just someone got the idea. It's not like it's a new thing. So. Yeah, I mean, the headlines say, that's the thing frustrating about it, is the headlines say they're using drones, and everybody thinks, oh, like the military drones.
But that word drone has become a hot,
I know.
a buzzword. It incites people.
Yeah.
What you don't want is a swarm of drones.
It depends on the drones. I mean, if you're talking about great big military aircraft that fly themselves, which is a drone, and it's what we call about when we don't like the fact that we're using robots to kill people in other countries, those kinds of drones is kind of a bad thing. But using drones to put cameras on them and get access to information about things that are happening in an easier and less risky way than we've ever been able to before, that's cool, and that's awesome.
Even in a swarm.
Even in a swarm. And using them for tasks like rescue and surveillance. And surveillance is a double-edged sword, but yeah. So there you go. Anybody who wants to debate me on this stuff, go ahead, because I love to listen to someone with a different opinion than me. That said, I'm going to get a flood of emails from the FBI. Are we done? We cover all the stuff we want to cover?
Yeah.
Where are my notes?
Didn't Bob have a
haven't
segment?
gone.
Bob, did you have a segment? Did I skip you?
I don't know.
I think I skipped you. You didn't have any slides. That's why I skipped you.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
So you were
That's
talking
okay.
about rigging the election, which I'm curious. How do they do that with drones?
Yeah, you can't.
Oh.
So in the last
That's
couple of weeks,
disappointing.
it's been more likely that we're going to have our first female president. We've seen we've seen some preemptive bitching from the likely loser, who is alleging that the election is, quote, rigged.
He's not a
Now,
likely
you might-
loser, regardless what happens.
Yeah.
Loser, yeah. Presumptive loser. Now, you might say that there are a number of ways to use the word rigged. On the media did a really good job discussing some of the ways that it's been used in the past. It's commonplace to say that the system is rigged so that no matter who wins the election, the common man loses, that sort of thing. But that's not really what the once and future failure is talking about here. He's talking about rigging ballot boxes, chicanery at the polls, deliberate thwarting of the electoral process. And this is not a new concern. It's always been there. People have always thought, like when the American experiment began, that one of the ways it was vulnerable was at the ballot box, that people might manipulate or rig elections. You can look back to John Adams writing to Thomas Jefferson about how the Jesuits could very well wreak havoc with our elections and impose a religious, borderline between church and state.
That's why our third president was a pope.
Right, exactly. People have always wondered about that, and that's why.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you have some type of, you're not sure about loyalty, some sort of transnational entity like Google or the Jesuits or the Catholic Church or Jews, there's room for interpretation of disloyalty, right? Among a certain type of person who is a dirtbag. And really, the attack on the validity of our polls is a cynical stab at the heart of the American project, which is completely disgusting, and I find abhorrent. So what would it actually take to rig an American election? Well, it turns out quite a hell of a lot. There is no standard federal election, right? Our federal elections are completely decentralized. With limited interference from above. There is no single federal system to hack, for instance. Among that, you see that there are something like 8,200 election entities who use different voting instruments, including electronic and paper ballots, mail, and all. The electronic ballots are not necessarily the same from jurisdiction or from polling place to polling place. There are levels of security, like security seals to make sure that nobody's tampering physically with the ballots that have to be signed off on by election officials, poll workers from both parties, that sort of thing. There are, actual election officials on call at all these sites and lawyers on call, and many layers of certification between the polling place and as it moves up the scale. There's also exit polling that helps confirm the results of what seems to be coming out of the polling place. And very often there's a paper trail, although not often enough, in my opinion. There should be a paper trail for every vote. But regardless, so you have all of these different layers, all these things that make it very hard to manipulate a national election. But the shriveled pumpkinhead is asserted, for instance, that dead people vote and tend to vote Democratic. And with so many of these conspiracy theories, there's a little tiny bit of truth in it. There are dead people on the voter rolls, but they're dead. When you look
can't really make
at
it to the polls,
it's hard to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, they used to in
find some
Chicago.
instances. Well, yeah, but
Sure.
since 1980, it's hard to find that.
Still hard. Statistically hard. Statistically hard for
Yes.
them to get. Yeah.
What you might get is, say,
happens.
someone who
It's rare.
dies in between the when the mail-in ballots have been sent in, and maybe their wife votes for them, right? Votes in their stead because they're dead. That type of thing, that might happen. But how often is that going to happen?
It washes out in the noise.
It's yeah.
The mistakes
So-
wash out in the noise too.
It's true. So what you have is that there was an academic study a couple of years ago that found out of a billion votes that have been cast that there are only 31 credible cases of voter impersonation, which is using someone else's ID or the identification of someone who's dead or whatever. There are only 31 credible cases in the country. Studies of illegal immigrants voting have found none. And that was another thing that Trump was, I'm sorry, the most horrible person on the planet at the moment was saying. but despite this overwhelming lack of evidence, a recent Politico poll found that 81% of Trump voters and 41% of voters in general thought that the election could be stolen. And this is very dangerous for the perception of the results over the next couple of weeks, I think. In some ways, I guess the Trump voters are primed for it.
You know, they never actually said how that question was asked, though. I'd really like to know how that question was asked, because how they define it and how they approach it, because that has a lot to do with it. I would probably have said, if it was stated exactly like that, I would probably have said, yeah, it could be stolen, because it could
theoretically.
be.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, is
That's
it likely to be defined stolen? Even if you don't define stolen, I would say no, it's not likely to be. But could it be? Sure.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm a little wary.
That's perhaps misleading. Okay, good call. All right, fair enough. I've got nothing. It sounded like there was something.
Him.
I felt the words marching up my throat.
So,
ready?
How does voter fraud compare to voter suppression?
Voter suppression scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that has been proposed is that Trump voters wear red, so you can see how many voters there are, you know, in photographs from polling places, just to show that there's an overwhelming turnout for Trump. Well,
you're still getting confirmation bias in observation there.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know that you'll be shown selectively edited images that disproportionately show people
even
in
so,
red.
it's just when you think that everybody agrees with you, that's all you see.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it must be rigged. Well, if you look at a map, you can see that quite possibly in your state, everybody you know is voting for him. You know,
right?
It's it's tricky.
It's possible though, even sane people would not have heard about this red thing and might just wear red when they went to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is that.
They aren't paying any attention.
And I was thinking, if you're in a place where a lot of people are doing that, and you show up without red, then somebody who is an asshole, would be like, "How come you're not voting for Trump, man? What's wrong with you?"
It is supposed to be a secret ballot.
Yes.
What's wrong?
And you're not.
And I find
supposed to wear anything political to
That's
the
right.
polls, right?
There's a reason for that too. It's called democracy.
And I realize, just wearing a color isn't inherently political unless you decide to try to make it inherently political.
Which is exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I think that there's a possibility that we'll see a minor dissatisfaction after the election with people who would otherwise be taking over park ranger stations, if you know what I'm saying. But, you may get one or two people trying to incite their race war.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned with the amount of emotion that I see. I'm concerned with people who are so invested in this and so terrified of Hillary Clinton because she's clearly going to be the winner here. So terrified of her, of what would happen if she becomes president, that and they feel helpless. And so what do people do when they feel backed into a corner? They lash out violently. Yeah. That's what they do. On the other hand, we're also talking about a group that the demographics of which don't, they're not younger, they're not so I don't know, but it does concern me.
It seems to me, and I would just frustrated that people who that have such strong opinions about such strong vocal emotional opinions about the presidential race, and if you ask them, they wouldn't know who their local representatives are.
Well, they don't feel that those people have the same impact on their lives. They can't see it.
Yeah, they have more
It's not
impact
in the
than
news.
that guy
But they
does.
actually can.
Probably
actually.
does.
You see.
Well,
they're not as
if
visible.
you live in California, it doesn't make any difference because our state and local representatives don't do a whole lot. Well, the school board does, but for the most part, they try to put everything back on the voters.
But your senators and your House representatives,
they don't do work.
Are involved in.
They don't do. I'm telling you, they do not make laws. They put everything back on the voters. We have such a back ass word.
Yeah.
They're trying to be a total democracy, and people don't know what they want, and they don't know anything about the issues. So we have all these propositions and crap, and that's a serious problem. Our Congress,
back to
the state Congress doesn't do anything.
How do you make sure? Because not everybody
we're
who's in
supposed to have a
politics wants everyone
representative
to be
government.
educated. So in
Well,
order to have a voting populace,
we're supposed to have a representative government. Why do we have representatives if we do not have a representative government? The state of California has so many amendments to our Constitution. We have something like 600 amendments to our Constitution. That's insane. It's insane.
Yep.
Because of our proposition system. It's because we have a proposition system, the representatives fall back on that. They don't have to take responsibility for what laws get passed, and they don't have to do any of the work to pass those laws if they can just get it on the ballot as a proposition.
And nobody votes.
It's ridiculous. And nobody what?
Votes them out.
No, people vote. No, nobody votes them out. Well, it's not even a matter of that. We have the system now. It's the system. It's not necessarily even the people we vote in. It's the system itself now. So we have the system.
Skewed in favor of them not making decisions and them. Yeah.
But how do you take the decisions away from the voters once they've had it? Now, I mean, how do you even campaign for that? Because you're basically saying you don't want people to. What does that say? Please stand by.
Stand by.
Because you don't. How do you tell people? Oh, well, we don't want you to make the choice. We want the lawmakers to make the choice.
This conversation is clearly larger, much larger than the conversation.
Yeah, it's insane. I'm sorry. I've gone way off track.
It's okay. It's good. It's good.
Sorry.
I was like, wow, we like.
I know. Jeez.
If you tapped into something.
It's a coprolite, or or the electoral system in California. You can just set Barb off.
Yep. And I would love to keep talking about this because I learned whenever I talk to somebody who's got strong opinions about something. So, but yes. Yeah. But since it's we're about a quarter after right now, let's and we've done all our meat, so let's do the dessert. Anybody? There's a couple. And Ben Bradley and Steve Exton and Howard Lewis are all having a ball on the YouTube chat room. Some comments about my glasses, which is here.
Which are not
the
really
glasses appear courtesy of Brains from the Thunderbirds, which is a great reference. He agrees with me on the drones being neutral and that surveillance is a two-edged sword. Thank you. I need a pat on the back. And they also agree that we can, both Howard and Ben agree that we should wear brown to the election because we could be the brown party, which is, I don't know, the shit party.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
It sounds like brown shirts, honestly.
Sounds fitting.
Yeah.
Didn't the guy who bombed the Discovery Channel building in Silver Spring wear all brown like a UPS uniform? That
so wearing brown means violence.
It may not be the best idea then. He met him a week before he did that. He was at a Skeptic event. Okay, so we've got we didn't have a trivia question this week, so thanks everybody for not really getting too upset about that. No one guessed the video. I guess there was one guess.
Nobody guessed the video?
Yeah, Mark Price guessed Critters, but it's not Critters. I kept.
It's one of my favorites.
It's not been on screen a whole lot, so maybe it's hard to get the spots that were recognizable. But this is one of my all-time favorite movies from the 80s.
Cult classic.
Peter Weller, Jonathan Lithgow. John Lithgow.
Big Booty.
Big Booty. the great Lord John Warfin, that's Buckaroo Banzai into the Eighth Dimension, which they were supposed to do a sequel and they never did. And actually, there's been rumor that
Jeff Goldblum and Chaps.
Yeah, Jeff Goldblum Chaps. There's been a rumor that the guy from the Nerdist,
Chris Hardwick,
is and what's the other guy's name? I can't remember. That they might be rebooting it as a TV series, which I don't know how that's going to work. How could you possibly do that without it making
Leave it alone?
80s
Without Lithgow and
I know Lithgow is like perfect. He's like the best thing about the movie.
It's one of his best roles.
I know, it's awesome. Anyway,
he's so good.
Sorry nobody got that, but hey, thanks for trying. What's next? Oh, we have announcements. We got some announcements. We've got. It's like Eve has a segment on the newest Skepticality episode, and there's a note here about it doesn't appear on the website. Can you explain? Can you explain?
The only thing I can explain is when I went to the website to get the link, it didn't have the most recent episode there. There are other ways to get it, like iTunes or other places you can get podcasts, but
okay. Well,
it did not appear to be on the Skepticality website.
If it's not there now, it may be at some point. If not, search for Skepticality and you can get some more of Eve. Any other
and I talked about damn clowns.
Damn clowns. Get those damn clowns here.
I was on, or I will be on the upcoming, I think it's the end of the month, maybe the 1st of November, Sharon Hill's new podcast, 15 Credibility Street.
Cool. I haven't listened to that yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I'll be on it.
On this past Sunday evening was the annual live Monster Talk podcast they did on Google Hangouts like we do on our show, and Blake hosted the show, and so did Karen, and Jeannie Scott was on it, and a bunch of other people I can't think of right now. But I helped host by being on there and helping them deal with technical issues, but you can see me being quiet in the background. To be honest, I was just fanboying Eugenie Scott because she's awesome. Anyway.
She is.
So there's that. Other announcements, Halloween. What else do you need to know? Other than that, book time. Who's got books?
I've got books.
You got books? Go, Barbara. Go, Barbara, go.
The first step in understanding how our nervous system processes perception of colors determine how our perception is related to a specific physical property of light. I chose the wrong place to go because now I have to look at a figure. I'll skip that. The colors we perceive in the spectrum are related to their wavelengths, but what about the colors of the objects? The colors of objects are largely determined by the wavelengths of light that are reflected from objects. More figures. Sorry, we'll just stop there.
Okay.
A lot of this is look at this picture.
Okay. Who's next? We'll look at the pictures in a minute. Eve, go.
What, my lord? Are you so choleric with Eleanor for telling but her dream? Next time I'll keep my dreams unto myself and be not checked. Nay, be not angry. I am pleased again.
Hey. Bob, go.
But it must cure lots of them. Look at the testimonials. Surely they're genuine. So's a rhinestone genuine. As a rhinestone. The testimonials that ain't bought or given as a favor are from rubes who want to see their names in print.
Rubes. Darn rubes. Being in the beam of that there time machine was a cross between flu wearing bifocals that had made for someone else who couldn't see and being inside a guitar. Until they improves it ain't never going to be safe or popular. What's your book, Barbara?
I'm intrigued. I just pulled a textbook off my shelf. It's Sensation and Perception by Goldstein.
Goldstein. It has horns too. Eve?
This is from what the 1986 Oxford Shakespeare chose to call the first part of the contention of the two famous houses of York and Lancaster, but which everyone else calls the second part of Henry VI. And I'm not sure what they're going to call it in the new edition. But this is actually from the Norton Shakespeare, which is based on the Oxford edition. But they at least subtitled it the second part of Henry VI. Oxford didn't.
Bob?
Mine is The Clarion, which is a novel that, oh shit. A novel that I printed up. I have to distract the face recognition software by staying in frame. The Clarion by Samuel Hopkins Adams, 1918. He wrote a book called The Great American Fraud, which was about quackery, and it was like one of the reasons why we have some regulation today. That and The Jungle were huge influences. And then he wrote this book about quackery.
Can I ask why you printed it up? Why did you print it?
I printed it up because I fucking despise using texts on screens. I hate them.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Well, especially if it's from something like archive, something that's out of print and or out of copyright and therefore available. Those are a pain to use.
They are, scrolling a PDF.
Yeah.
This will give me something that I can read at night before I go to sleep. Something solid. Something that won't be bright.
My iPad. I'm connected to my iPad. I'm like sewn to it. I love reading on it.
I would rather not.
In fact, I'm getting rid of like 500 books.
I like books and I like reading on my iPad. It really depends on the mood and where I'm at and stuff. And I like having copies of things I really enjoy. So
I
used to be that way. I used to feel that way, and now I'm getting rid of all of my books because it's just like I don't need them anymore.
It takes space too, so you gotta have space to put stuff and collect dust and all that crap.
They're just collecting dust.
So
they look stupid.
So I have a book too.
Yes, I know. I want to know what it is too because I'm dying to know what it is because it's a time travel book.
Yeah, it's can you guess?
No, I didn't guess from that. What is it?
No. It's a Kurt Vonnegut.
I haven't read it then.
Yeah, it's not one that I read either. It's just kind of I found.
Bob, can you guess?
Wait, which bookstore. Say it again.
What? Kurt
Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut.
Give me a line.
You weren't paying attention?
The one I read?
Yeah.
Well, it was in dialect, I thought. So
it's in an accent, yes.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the voice that I hear in my head when I read this character, as he gives his description of his experience. He's like, I don't know if he's Southern or not, but that's kind of what was in my head.
Just spill. What is it? What is it? I want to know.
Oh, it's Armageddon in retrospect.
Huh.
And it's kind of a story from the perspective of a young soldier and in a big war, and apparently has time travel.
Huh.
But I haven't got all the way through it yet. It was a bargain bin.
No.
Yeah, a bargain bin on.
I think this is. I think it's it's one of these posthumous works of his.
Yeah, it was published in 2008.
Like Shakespeare, he keeps writing.
Yeah, it keeps new plays by Vonnegut.
It says it was first published in Great Britain in 2008. So he was still around in 2008. So wasn't he?
That's really at the edge of it.
Yeah, I know.
You know what? I don't think so. I think he may have died in 2007. I got. When did I graduate, Eve?
2008.
Looking it
I thought it was 2008. So he died before I finished my dissertation. So.
He died in 2007.
April 2007. So this must have been something that he was published for him afterwards. Huh. That would explain why I hadn't read it. So,
me too.
There you go. So far, it's been interesting, but I haven't finished yet. I'll let you know when I'm done. Okay. I think that's enough of an episode, don't you? Have we made up for the 3 weeks being away? I don't know. We should do something like a big dance.
You can never actually make up for it.
Yes.
Sort of like sleep. You can't really catch up.
Can we do a coordinated dance routine thing?
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, big Bollywood exit.
Left and right. Left and right.
Okay. So let me make sure that I got my script in front of me. I'm going to start the music. I made it louder just a little bit because I like it loud. So there you go. Thank you all for watching our shenanigans. Now go. Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of Skeptics.net, Skeptical Enemies, myself, ICBS Everywhere, and Alpha News. Our logo was designed by Sarah Mayhew at sarahmayhew.com. Our features are buttons.
It wasn't very coordinated.
No, it isn't. Oh well.